Hi, so today we're going to talk about different carbon compounds. So let's talk about carbon first and why it's so important in living things. Organic chemistry is the study of all compounds that contain bonds between carbon atoms. Carbon atoms have 4 valence electrons that can join with the electrons from other atoms to form strong covalent bonds. And as you learned in the first section, atoms want 8 valence electrons to fill their orbital. So because there's only 4 in carbon, it wants 4 more. So it can make up to 4 bonds. So it can bond to other carbon atoms, giving it the ability to form chains that are almost unlimited in length. This is what is unique about carbon, is the fact that it can form 4 bonds and it can bond with itself in these long chains, and it actually forms other structures as well. Living organisms are made up of molecules that consist of carbon and other elements. Chains of carbon can even close upon themselves to form rings. And carbon has the ability to form millions of different large and complex structures. That's why it's the building block of living things. So you can see it's 4 valence electrons here. It wants 4 more. So it can actually make up to 4 more bonds. Okay? So if we take this carbon, for example, it makes another bond with carbon, 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 and hydrogen. 4 different bonds. As a result, you can make long chains of carbon, you can make carbon rings, etc. So macromolecules. They're formed by a process called polymerization. And the smaller units or monomers join together to form polymers. That's the process of polymerization. So each individual unit is called a monomer. Mono means one, poly means many. So a lot of monomers make up one polymer. So monomers in a polymer may be identical or they can be different. So monomers in this case, they're all different. They're all different colors in this case. Or they can be uniform and be the exact same. So 4 groups of organic compounds are found in living things. So 4 compounds that contain carbon. First is carbohydrates, second lipids, third nucleic acids, and fourth proteins. We are not going to talk about nucleic acids because we will be going over the structure of nucleic acids later on in the year. So let's start with carbohydrates. They're compounds made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, usually in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. So the function of carbohydrates is living things use carbohydrates as their main source of energy. So carbohydrates are used for energy. Plants and some animals also use carbohydrates for structural purposes. The breakdowns of sugars, such as glucose, supply immediate energy for cell activities. Living things store extra sugar as complex carbohydrates known as starches. And as you know, extra sugar can also be stored as fat. So this monosaccharide, mono means one glucose molecule, this is what can be broken down quickly to provide energy to your cells. Disaccharide, like table sugar, is called sucrose, and it's a disaccharide. It can easily be broken down into glucose. And then your complex carbs, like your starches, like your white breads and stuff. This is what it's made of, and as you can see, it can easily be broken down into individual glucose molecules. So in other words, just like sugar, bread can be broken down into glucose instantly, and then if you have too much of it, it gets stored as fat. So starches and sugars are examples of carbohydrates that are used by living things as a source of energy. So a starch is a long polymer made up of many monomers of glucose. So single sugar molecules are called monosaccharides. Remember, mono means one. So monosaccharides include glucose, galactose, which is a component of milk, and fructose, which is found in fruit. The large molecules formed from monosaccharides are called polysaccharides. So this is a monosaccharide. We have one glucose molecule. This is a polysaccharide because there are many monosaccharides joined together. The second molecule we'll talk about is lipids, also known as fats. Lipids are generally not soluble in water. Because they're nonpolar, they don't mix with water, which is why oil stays on top of water. They're made mostly from carbon and hydrogen atoms. And the common categories of lipids are fats, oils, waxes, and steroids. So oils you're familiar with, fats like in butter, there's fat in oils as well, wax, and then these are different types of steroids: testosterone, cortisone, cholesterol, vitamin D, all different types of steroids, which are examples of lipids. So the main function of lipids, they can be used for energy. So fat can be broken down to use for energy. But some lipids are important parts of biological membranes and waterproof coverings. So the main part of the outside of your cell is composed of lipids. So lipids are essential for the structure of your cells. So many lipids are formed when glycerol molecules combine with compounds called fatty acids. So remember, lipids are fats, they're made of fatty acids. So if each carbon atom in a lipid's fatty acid chain is joined to another carbon atom by a single bond, the lipid is said to be saturated. The term saturated is used because the fatty acids contain the maximum possible number of hydrogen atoms. So this is an example of a saturated fatty acid. Each carbon is joined by a single bond. And as a result, because it's such a uniform structure, those molecules can pack so closely together that in general, saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So like butter is full of saturated fats. Or meats, where you can actually see the fat and it's solid, that is also a lot of saturated fat. So here's the main structure. It's made of a glycerol molecule that looks like this, and this is a fatty acid chain. This is a triglyceride because there's 1, 2, 3 fatty acids. Tri means 3. So this is a glycerol molecule bound to 3 fatty acids. This is the common structure of lipids. So if there is at least one carbon-carbon double bond in a fatty acid, it's said to be unsaturated. Lipids whose fatty acids contain more than one double bond are called polyunsaturated, many unsaturated. So here's an example. We have 1, 2, 3 double bonds between the carbons. So this is a polyunsaturated fat. And because we have these double bonds, what happens is the molecule kinks and it's not as uniform, so it can't stack together, which is why generally unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. So like your oils. Okay, the last molecule we're going to talk about, because we're skipping nucleic acids, is proteins. They're macromolecules that contain nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins are polymers of molecules called amino acids. So amino acids strung together make a protein. Amino acids are compounds with an amino group, which is an NH2 group. So here's your amino group on one end and a carboxyl group, COOH, on the other end. The portion of each amino acid that is different is a side chain called an R group. So this is what differs. All amino acids have an amino group and a carboxyl group, but they differ in their R group. So here's an example of alanine, which is an amino acid, and serine, which is a different amino acid. The instructions for arranging amino acids into many different proteins are stored in DNA. And you guys are going to see that later in the year, exactly how proteins are made. But the information comes from DNA, and then we assemble the amino acids in the order that the DNA tells us to. So the functions of proteins: some proteins control the rate of reactions and regulate cell processes. So for example, enzymes, which we'll learn in the next section, are examples of proteins. Some are used to form bones and muscles, and other proteins transport substances into or out of cells or help fight disease. Proteins can have up to 4 levels of organization. So amino acids have a specific chain. So this is like the first line in making a protein. The specific amino acid chain. What order the amino acids go in. And then the amino acids within the chain can be twisted or folded. Because of their properties, their chemical properties, they can be twisted or they can be folded into sheets. And then the chain itself is folded on itself again. And if the protein has more than one chain, each chain has a specific arrangement in space. This is what causes the proteins to become three-dimensional. So it's not just a simple chain. Proteins actually fold into very, very unique shapes. And that is all for today. Thanks for watching.